I have my elastic run through my casing, and I'm just going to double check before I sew that with my casing pinned together, nothing's twisted. So I'm going to run my fingers all the way around, make sure it's not twisted, because now is the time to fix it before you sew it. If you sew it twisted, it's going to be stuck twisted. And then I'm going to pull my elastic out of my casing just a little bit so that I have some space to sew. And I have drawn on here, I know it's kind of messy and it's bled through a little bit, but there's a square and an X, and I'm going to sew the square and the X to make sure that my elastic is very, very strong. So to start, I'm going to just sew on these lines. So I'll line up with one side of my square. I can lower my needle using my hand wheel, and I'm doing this kind of motion where I'm taking my thumb, turning it towards me on my hand wheel. I'll lower that in, lower my presser foot, back stitch, forwards, back, and then I'm going to sew down to the end, get ready to pivot. So I'll use my hand wheel to turn my needle down for my pivot, lift up my presser foot, turn my fabric, then I will sew down this edge of the square. Do the same thing using my hand wheel, pulling my thumb towards me. I'll pivot. I'll sew down this side. It's important to have a pin on either side because it helps keep my square all together. I'm going to sew this, and my pin's actually, I'm not sewing on it, but the head of it is getting stuck in my feed dog. So I'll pull this pin out right now because I'm working on that side now. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to use my hand wheel, pulling my thumb towards me again to pivot, do the last side of the square. I'll go down. Once I've completed the square, I'm going to pivot one more time. Well, I'll pivot a couple more times, but I'm going to pivot so that I'm going down one of my X's. So I'm going to go from the diagonal of the X, lower my presser foot, also to the opposite corner. Lower my needle. Now I can pick either of these sides of the square to sew down. I'm just going to pick this one over here. Sew down that one so I can get to a good spot to sew this last part of my X. So I'll just sew down here, put my needle down, and then I'm going to prepare to sew this last part of the X that I haven't sewn yet. And I will sew that and back stitch. I'm going to trim my threads here. Let's zoom out a little. Trim my threads, and then I have this square with an X sewn onto my elastic, making it very strong. You can see that one of my threads kind of got caught in the back, which is fine. I'll pull that out and get it out of the way in a minute. But you can see square, X inside, and that's going to keep my elastic together so it's not going to break. Now that it's sewn, I can go ahead and trim any extra elastic I have. So I'm just going to trim that here so it's not as bulky, and trim over here. And then I can take my casing, kind of pull on it like so, and my whole elastic's going to go up. The last thing I need to do is sew this hole closed.